My name is Jax Mercer. I'm 19 years old. My name is written in Guildmaster Aurelius's records at the Vanguard with a completely useless E-rank skill, soul resonance, which lets me perceive and communicate with monster consciousness, combat value negligible, and 6 months ago Guildmaster Aurelius once put his hand on my shoulder and said I had undeniable potential, and would be the first in Vanguard history to reach S rank by 18, but the truth right now is a void lord named Malakor is sitting in my living room eating barbecue potato chips and arguing with me about whether pineapple belongs on pizza, and the good news is, he's not the evil demon the kingdom made him out to be. He's just someone very tall, 8 feet, made of void energy and bad decisions, and 4 years after getting my E rank, I am the most wanted man alive across the entire kingdom. I placed my hand on the altar at the annual awakening assessment, and then pure white light, blinding as dying stars, exploded across the great hall, not the usual gold or blue or green indicating your affinity, not even the legendary purple that only appeared once every 50 years, it was white, causing everyone in the room to gasp, nobles standing up from their velvet cushions, and Guildmaster Aurelius, whose famous poker face had been frozen solid for a decade, even leaning forward slightly as if he couldn't believe his own eyes, because this was the light of S-rank potential, the kind that comes around once in a generation. But the moment I stepped away from the altar, the white light faded, and hanging in the air for just a second before the crowd realized what it was, a tiny, sad, gray flicker, like a dying gas station light bulb at 2 a.m., along with text appearing in the air like a neon sign, soul resonance. E rank. Affect, perceive and communicate with monster consciousness. Combat value, negligible, then silence fell across the hall, and then someone at the back started laughing, then more people, then the entire room erupted in laughter, and someone even threw a real, actual, garden fresh tomato that hit my shoulder and splattered red all over my freshly pressed assessment uniform. Guildmaster Aurelius turned and walked out of the hall before the ceremony even ended, not bothering to speak to me even once, and the nobles followed like sheep, while my parents stood in the front row, mother waving so hard she nearly fell over the railing, and now they looked like they wanted to dig a hole in the marble floor and lie in it until the end of time, and 4 years earlier, I had been placed in the golden ranks of the Vanguard, the kind of golden child Guildmaster Aurelius called undeniable potential. I had actual fan mail from strangers who'd seen my training scores pinned on the guild bulletin board, and now, only 10 seconds after placing my hand on the altar, I was the greatest waste of potential in Vanguard history. 4 years after that fateful day, I lived as a clown. My cousin called me the Monster Whisperer at my grandmother's birthday party right in front of everyone, and my grandmother nodded in agreement like it was the most accurate description she'd ever heard. Mercenaries in the mess hall picked up their trays and moved to different tables the moment I walked in. My parents stopped introducing me at family gatherings and started leaving the room when I came home like I was contagious. I trained until my hands bled, took on bottom-of-the-barrel jobs, slime nests, rat tunnels, sewer clearance, and the newspapers gave me the nickname Mercer the Mockery on their front pages, to the point where my parents framed it and hung it in our hallway, still there to this day. Then came the breach at the Nest of the Fallen, when a dark portal ripped open above the dungeon like someone had torn the sky, and something huge crawled out, a breach titan, a Class A horror that could level a city block before breakfast, causing the nearest border village to send a panic signal, and the Vanguard mobilized every mercenary within 50 miles, lined up in the Great Hall, S-rank in gleaming golden armor at the front, A-rank behind them like a B-team that knew their place, B and C-rank as support, and finally, where no light reached, in the dark corner, D and E rank, the cannon fodder reserve, only used to buy time. Mara, a C-rank archer who'd been at the Vanguard for 12 years and the only person who'd ever bought me a drink without making fun of my skill, grabbed my arm, her fingers rough from years of bowstrings, her face set with genuine worry. Jax, don't. They said E rank stays. It's a direct order from the guild master himself. I pulled my arm away, gentle but firm, because the words, Jax, don't, had been said to me 1,000 times over 4 years. Don't apply for the tournament, don't try out for special operations, don't even bother training with the senior squad, don't, always a reason why I couldn't, why I should stay in my lane, but this time, I didn't listen. I pushed through the crowded hall, mercenaries parting, not out of respect, but pure confusion. Nobody expected this, not Mara, who'd watched me training alone at midnight for 4 straight years, not Brick, that loud S-rank brick of a mercenary who'd been calling me Snack Boy for 3 months straight, and certainly not Kale, standing at the main entrance mounting his horse with his usual pomp, shining armor, golden sword with the Vanguard crest, 2 senior mercenaries flanking him like bodyguards. He'd been my best friend when I was 14, used to carry my books after training sessions, brought me honey cakes when I was studying late, looked up to me like a big brother who could do no wrong. But then Kale's awakening hit, A rank, and he trained, fought, bled, and clawed his way to S rank in 3 years flat, and somewhere along the way, the boy who'd carried my books started looking down at me, started pushing me around in front of the recruits, started making jokes about my skill to the girls he wanted to impress, so that by the time I was 19, Kale Voss was my friend in the same way a shark is your swimming companion, technically together, but one wrong move and you're toast. Kale spotted me walking toward the gate and laughed, loud enough for everyone at the gate to hear, "Hey, look who crawled out of the dumpster. You gonna hold my horse for me, Mercer? Or maybe, you gonna negotiate a peace treaty with the Breach Titan before we have to fight it?" I said nothing, just kept walking, because he wasn't worth the breath, and honestly, my ribs hurt too much to argue with him. The Breach Titan was tearing through the border villages by the time we arrived, bodies in the streets, cottages burning, a child's doll half-burned lying in the mud with its stuffing spilling out like gray snow, and while I'd seen pictures of Breach Titans in the Vanguard briefing rooms, big, ugly, 10-limbed horrors with more teeth than a shark festival, seeing one in person, feeling the ground shake with every lumbering step, hearing distant screams, was different, was worse. We charged forward, the Vanguard's A-rank fighters went in first, forming a phalanx with shields locked, and the Titan swatted them like flies. I watched an S-rank knight, a veteran with 20 years of experience named Torben who'd once bought me ale and said my skill wasn't that bad, get thrown across the field like a rag doll, his armor crumpled, and he didn't get up. Then Kale made his move, swords blazing, golden light pouring from his blade like he was trying to outshine the sun, but the Titan barely registered him. One swing caught Kale in the ribs and sent him flying 30 feet into an oak tree, sliding to the ground dazed, and the senior mercenaries behind Kale, the ones who'd spent 4 years beating me down in sparring matches, making fun of my skill, laughing when I got assigned to sewer duty, hesitated, froze, because the Titan was winning, and they knew it. Their golden boy, their star recruit, the guy who could bench press a horse, was lying at the base of a tree with possible broken ribs, and they were next. Right then, the ground opened beneath my feet. I didn't exactly fall. One moment I was standing on solid earth shifting my weight for a better angle on the Titan's limb joints, and the next there was nothing but air and darkness beneath me. I grabbed at the edge of the fissure, dirt crumbling through my fingers, while the Titan's shadow loomed above me, its many-limbed form blocking out the sun. From above the fissure I heard voices, Kale's voice, breathless and in pain but definitely Kale, along with the senior mercenaries, and then the words that stopped me from struggling, "Cut the rope. Cut the damn rope. Let him fall. He's dead weight." I looked up, Kale standing at the edge of the fissure, golden sword in hand, armor dented, blood trickling from his forehead, but looking down at me, and the face of the boy I'd known my whole life was completely gone. "I'm sorry, Jax," Kale said, his voice carrying across the battlefield, to the villagers hiding in their cellars, to the birds that had stopped singing in shock, but the Vanguard can't afford to waste resources on an E-rank. If you're gonna die, might as well be doing something useful. Distract it long enough for us to regroup. He turned to the mercenary beside him, a senior named Rourke who'd never said a cruel word to me in his life, and said, "Cut it, Rourke." Rourke, who wouldn't meet my eyes, and the rope was cut. I fell. The shaft dropped me 300 feet. I hit the bottom hard enough to crack 2 ribs and probably bruise every organ I owned. The first hour I just tried not to die, tried to breathe through the pain radiating from my chest to my fingertips, tried to ignore the fact that the man I'd called my best friend had just thrown me down a hole, and by the second hour I'd given up on that not dying thing and started wandering through the ancient dungeon, with bioluminescent fungi on the walls, providing the only light, casting everything in an eerie blue-green glow, the air cold and smelling of sulfur and something else, something sweet, like overripe fruit left in the sun too long. By the third hour, I'd accepted my fate, found a relatively comfortable-looking rock, sat down and waited for whatever lived here to find me, a cave spider, probably. Or a slime. Something quick, something that wouldn't hurt too much. Then I heard the growl, low, barely there, rumbling up from somewhere deep below, not a hunting roar but an annoyed growl, like something had just been stepped on while trying to nap. I fumbled for the rusty knife I'd picked up at the surface, my only weapon, barely sharp enough to cut bread, and pressed myself against the wall, my ribs screaming in protest, the growl getting louder and closer, and then I saw the eyes, 2 massive, burning crimson orbs in the darkness, each the size of a dinner plate, blinking slowly, deliberately, like someone who'd just been woken up from a very long nap was trying to figure out why there was a 19-year-old boy with a rusty knife. leaning against a rock wall in their dungeon. I opened my mouth, practiced what I'd say in my head. Please don't eat me, was too pathetic. I have snacks, was more honest but also pathetic. I am the rightful heir to the throne of Ethelgard, was a lie and incredibly stupid. And what came out was, dude, your dungeon is really cold. The growl went up an octave, the eyes blinked again, then a shape materialized from the dark, massive, scarred, 8 feet of obsidian armor and void-forged chains, wings folded above him like a cape of concentrated shadow, a face that had seen 1,000 battles and was not impressed by any of them. He was Malakor the Void Reaper, the ancient terror, the guy the kingdom had nursery rhymes about, sitting in the corner of the dungeon chained to the wall, and he looked so incredibly bored that I lost 5 full seconds just gaping at him. Then he asked, his voice deep, not the demonic growl from bard songs and tavern stories, but the voice of someone who'd had a really long day and just wanted to go home and take a nap. You have snacks? I stared at him for a full 5 seconds, blinked twice, then replied, I have a half granola bar. And a very squished apple. That's about it. I think the granola bar might have chocolate chips. If that helps. He looked at me, then at the crumbled granola bar in my hand, then back at me, then said, not even as a question, you're not here to kill me. Okay. No. I'm not. But technically, my guild sent me down here for that exact purpose. They called it a retrieval mission. I think that retrieval part was my corpse. The mission part was optional. He nodded, finishing my sentence, to die. Yeah. I heard the argument at the shaft. Kale, right. Golden hair, personality of a damp rag, thinks honor is something you polish on your armor. I blinked. You heard that. I have excellent hearing. And excellent memory. 7 centuries of it. I heard him tell your body to do something useful for once. Very touching. Almost made me cry. If I could cry. Which I can't. Void demons don't have tear ducts. He didn't look like he wanted to cry, he looked like he hadn't cried since the invention of bread, which, for the record, was about 12,000 years before this conversation. I rummaged in my pack and pulled out the half granola bar and the apple and tossed them to him. He caught them, his clawed hand moving with surprising delicacy, examining them like sacred relics discovered in an ancient tomb. Then he said, unwrapping the granola bar very carefully like he thought it might explode, 412 years. 412 years in this dungeon. Every adventurer who found me, hundreds over the centuries, tried to stab me, or curse me, or take selfies with my sleeping form. Some of them monologued. You know how boring monologues are when you've heard every variation of, I am the chosen one, for 400 years. Food. Not a single crumb. Rough, I said, understated but sincere. The granola bar is Trader Joe's. Brown sugar. If you're gonna complain about the apple being bruised, I'll eat it myself. It's been in my pack for 2 days. Malakor paused mid-bite, looking at me like I'd just spoken ancient Greek. Why? His ancient crimson eyes, burning and vast, fixed on my face. Why would you give me food? Your guild left you for dead. Your friends betrayed you. Everyone you ever cared about thinks you're trash. And your options right now are, wait for a cave spider to eat you, wait for me to get hungry enough to eat you, or try to climb 300 feet of shaft with 2 broken ribs. And you're offering me food. Look, I said, with full sincerity, holding nothing back, I've been called trash for 4 years straight. My own grandmother introduced me as the disappointment at my 18th birthday party. I know what it's like when everyone writes you off, when they look right through you like you're invisible. So, yeah. If you want the granola bar, I'm not gonna stop you. If you want to eat me instead, go ahead. But we're both stuck down here. We might as well make it interesting. Malakor was quiet for a long time, long enough that I started wondering if he'd decided to eat me after all. Then he finished the apple, even the bruised parts. Yours, he said. Slightly bruised. Not ideal. But acceptable for dungeon cuisine. It's been in my pack for 2 days, I replied. My defense is I was running for my life when I packed it. Fair enough. He bit into the bruised part. So. You were saying about your grandmother. And just like that, 4 centuries of imprisonment, hundreds of failed attempts to summon or slay him, and all it took was a 19-year-old kid with a half granola bar and a very squished apple asking if his dungeon was cold to start a conversation that would change everything. We talked for hours, not about grand things, not about kingdoms or wars or the awakening system, but about stupid, mundane, deeply human things. I told him about Kale, my best friend who used to carry my books after training, who cried when I got my E-rank assessment because he thought the whole thing was rigged and unfair, who now was the one pushing me down a dungeon shaft. Malakor told me about the long winter of 892, about a small village that had taken him in when everyone else was running in terror, about Alara, the first hero who'd ever spoken to him without a sword drawn, who brought him soup during the worst blizzard in recorded history, about how the kingdom had twisted everything about him, how they'd taken a being who'd once protected villages from actual monsters and painted him as the biggest monster of all. Then I asked, so why stay? After 4 centuries. You could have left any time. Broken those chains. Walked out. Instead you napped. Because I was tired, he said, fixing those ancient crimson eyes on me, and for the first time I saw something behind the boredom, something weary, something almost human. Conquering dungeons gets old after the first 300. Fighting heroes with tragic backstories and the power of friendship gets old after the first 30. Being sealed, resealed, rewritten into folk tales, used as a monster of the week in nursery rhymes, that got old around year 200. Then I got bored. Then I started napping. Then I started enjoying it, never mind. He shifted his chains, one void-forged iron link coming loose in his hand with a metallic clang, snapped like a twig, the same chains that had held him for 4 centuries. The chains weren't binding my power, he said, tossing the broken link aside. It clattered on the stone floor, still warm to the touch. They never were. They were binding my patience. And patience ran out somewhere around, about 6 hours ago. When you showed up. Why now? Because you didn't come at me with a sword. You didn't come at me with a curse. You didn't come at me with a speech about aiding the kingdom or ending my reign of terror. You came in here with half a granola bar and a squished apple and asked if my dungeon was cold. 412 years. And you're the first person who ever just talked to me. Like I was a person. Not a weapon. Not a villain. A person. I didn't know what to say to that. Nobody had ever looked at me like I was anything more than a disappointment, not my parents, not the Vanguard, not Kale, and here was the most powerful being in the kingdom, looking at me like I was the most interesting thing he'd seen in 4 centuries, so I tried to lighten the mood, tried to push past the lump in my throat. So, I said, attempting casual, what's the plan? We gonna stay down here forever? Become dungeon roommates? I can do the cooking, you can do the killing. Malakor shook his massive head, chains rattling, the heavy metallic sound echoing through the cavern. I cannot stay. The outer seal was already weakening before you fell. By tomorrow, it breaks completely. The Vanguard will send a retrieval team. They'll find my body. And they'll try to kill me again. And this time, I'm not in the mood for negotiations. And me. You're with me. By choice. Not by force. That matters. He stood up, the chains on his massive 10-foot void shadow wings unwinding with a whisper of ancient mechanisms, and for the first time in 4 centuries, Malakor the Void Reaper was standing free, and he chose to leave with a 19-year-old E-rank mercenary his own guild had left for dead. He handed me the chain link he'd broken, heavy, easily 20 pounds of cold dark iron that seemed to drink the light around it, surprisingly warm like it had been sitting in sunlight. Here, he said. A weapon. The forge in the upper levels should still work. You'll need it. Why? Because we're leaving. And there will be things trying to stop us. He started walking toward the shaft. I followed, and I had no idea that chain would become my signature weapon, that it would save my life 12 times before we reached the surface, that it would later be known across the kingdom as the void-forged flail of the E-rank mercenary. The climb out took 6 hours. We fought through everything the dungeon could throw at us. Cave trolls with clubs the size of tree trunks, crystal wyverns that could turn your bones to glass with a single shriek, swarms of void spawn that could melt steel with a touch. Malakor plowed through them like wet tissue paper, and I fought with the chain, swinging it like a massive flail, taking out 3 cave trolls in one swing, and honestly, It was the most fun I'd had in 4 years. I got a cut on my forehead that should have killed a normal man. Malakor took a spear to the shoulder that would have killed a demigod, and we both just kept going, not because we were heroes, but because we were both so tired of being written off that the idea of stopping, of letting anyone else tell us what we couldn't do, was more painful than any wound. When we broke the surface, the sun was rising, golden light spilling over the horizon painting the landscape in orange and pink. I was half convinced I'd hallucinated the entire 6 hours, maybe I'd died at the bottom of that shaft, maybe this was my ghost wandering the afterlife accompanied by an 8-foot void demon who ate granola bars, until Malakor's wings unfurled behind him with a sound like distant thunder. 8 feet of pure void shadow blocking out the morning sun, the wind from those wings strong enough to blow my hair back, and I knew this was real. Malakor's status screen appeared in the air like a hologram, visible only to me, a side effect of soul resonance, which had apparently upgraded when I bonded with the strongest monster in the kingdom, and I saw, Entity, Malakor the Void Reaper, True Class, Monarch of the Void, Power Rating, SSS, Unmeasurable, along with a list of skills that made my head spin, Void Collapse capable of instant area annihilation, Shadow Dominion giving him control over all darkness creatures within a 500-kilometer radius, Monarch's command granting absolute authority over rank D and below void entities, 4 sealed abilities each marked with 3 question marks each more terrifying than the last, and beneath his screen, my own, Jax Mercer, Awakening Score, E+, Skill 1, Upgraded, Soul Resonance, now called Monarch's Bond, New Effect, can command all creatures rank D and below through Malakor's authority, bonus. Malakor's stats partially sync to user. My trash skill had evolved, my worthless mockery of a skill had grown up, and the person responsible wasn't the kingdom, wasn't the vanguard, wasn't any hero or teacher or master who'd told me I'd never amount to anything. It was a bored void demon who'd spent 4 centuries in a dungeon because nobody had ever brought him a snack, and I looked out at the terrain. The vanguard collapse camp was exactly where we'd left it. I could see the tents from the ridge above the dungeon entrance. Torches flickering, guards posted at every approach, and standing at the front, golden armor gleaming in the morning sun, Kale, who'd recovered, of course, S-rank regeneration making broken ribs at most a minor inconvenience, talking to a group of senior mercenaries with dramatic gestures, probably telling the story of how he'd single-handedly held off the breach titan while I wasn't there. We walked down the ridge toward the camp. The guard spotted us first, one of them squinted, then his eyes went so wide I thought they might pop out of his skull. He reached for his horn, probably to sound the alarm, to announce that the Void Lord had returned, but before he could blow it, Malakor took just one step forward, a single step, and the ground shook, not from an earthquake, but from one step of an 8-foot void demon with enough power in his left pinky to level a city wall. The guard dropped his horn, stepped back, then turned and ran so fast he tripped over his own boots, and that got everyone's attention. Within 30 seconds the entire operating camp was in chaos. Mercenaries drew swords with 1,000 clatters in unison, archers knocked arrows with shaking hands, a battlemage in a red robe started chanting so loud her voice cracked, and then they really saw Malakor, wings unfurling to their full span blocking out the dawn sun, ancient obsidian armor catching the light, crimson eyes that had conquered more dungeons than any of them would ever see in 3 lifetimes, and then Kale stepped forward, golden armor, somehow perfect hair despite the morning humidity and recent trauma, smug expression, the kind of face you'd see on propaganda posters for a war nobody wanted. Kale drew his sword, the one he'd gotten as a reward for single-handedly clearing a breach hive, or so the stories went, and pointed it at me. Mercer. You're alive. That's unexpected. His voice carried across the camp, sharp and commanding, but I could hear the crack in it, the doubt. Then he switched into Guild Commander mode like it would make his authority real. Surrender the Void Lord. Guild Order. He's a Class A designated threat. You're harboring a hostile entity without authorization. That's treason. I looked at him, really looked at him, the boy who'd carried my books after training sessions, who'd cried when I got my E-rank assessment because he thought the whole thing was rigged and unfair, who'd stood beside me while Brick and the others threw rocks at my dorm window until I'd told him to stop, and he had, even though the others kept throwing, who'd changed, who'd become this hollow, golden, perfect thing that measured people by their rank and usefulness. Tell Guild Master Aurelius. I said, keeping my voice level, not trembling, not angry, just bone-deep tired, that I quit. Kale blinked. What? I quit. I'm done. Done being your errand boy. Done being the Guild's pet project. Done being the guy you push around to make yourself feel bigger. Done being cannon fodder for missions even the B-rank mercenaries won't take. Tell him to find a new punching bag. Or better yet, tell him to look at the dark artifact he buried in the deepest chamber of this dungeon. The one he's been siphoning power from for 4 years. The camp went silent, you could have heard a pin drop, even the birds stopped singing, and Kale's sword hand was shaking, just slightly, a tell, he knew about the vessel. You have no idea what you're talking about, Kale said, his voice no longer as confident as 30 seconds ago. The vessel is a myth. A fairy tale. Don't lie to me, Kale. I saw the star chart in your private vault. The one with the X marked at depth 23. You've been hiding it for 4 years. Siphoning energy from something you don't understand, feeding it to the Sacred Seven, making yourself indispensable to a kingdom that would burn you alive if they found out. Mercer. A different voice, I recognized it, second-in-command Rourke, grizzled veteran, 30 years at the Vanguard, who'd never been cruel to me, kid. You know what you're holding. You know what he can do. He gestured at Malakor. You really think you can control a Void Lord? I looked at Rourke, then at Malakor, and Malakor spoke, his voice rumbling through the camp like distant thunder, low, steady, unshakable. He's not controlling me. I'm choosing to be here. Rourke's eyes widened, just a fraction. A man who'd spent 30 years facing down monsters recognized the truth when he heard it. No status screen needed to confirm, and that single sentence did more than any speech could have. It told every mercenary in that camp that Jax Mercer was not Malakor's prisoner. Malakor was Jax's choice. Then Kale completely lost it. His aura exploded, golden A-rank energy bright enough to burn your retinas. He charged forward with sword raised, every instinct screaming for dominance, for submission, for the boy he'd spent 4 years pushing around to finally kneel. But Malakor didn't even move, didn't activate a single skill, didn't even look annoyed, just stood there, massive and immovable. While Kale's golden sword came within an inch of his chest, then Malakor flexed, just one shoulder. A tiny barely there shift of mass and void energy, and the shock wave from that flex sent Kale flying 30 feet, golden armor crumpling like tin foil, hitting the ground so hard I heard something snap, lying there for a full 10 seconds without moving. The camp erupted, mercenaries scrambling back, arrows clattering to the ground, a battlemage tripping over her own robes, 3 mercenaries abandoning their posts entirely and running for the tree-line. I stepped forward and put a hand on Malakor's massive forearm, gently, like he was a skittish horse. Easy, big guy, I said quietly, he's not worth the calories. Malakor grumbled, a sound like boulders grinding together deep underground. He insulted the snacks. I know. The granola bar was Trader Joe's. Brown sugar. It was a good granola bar. Then we turned and walked away from the camp, away from the Vanguard, away from everything I'd ever known, mercenaries parting like the Red Sea, nobody daring to raise a weapon as a 19-year-old E-rank. Nobody walked past 300 trained fighters with an 8-foot void demon at his side. I didn't look back, not even once, and once the forest swallowed us I leaned against a tree and let my knees buckle, all the adrenaline draining out of me at once, leaving me shaking so bad my teeth chattered, and Malakor asked, his voice genuinely softer now, concerned in his own gruff 1,000-year-old way, you okay? Never better, I lied, ribs screaming, forehead bleeding, definitely concussed from the flex shockwave. You. I'm a void demon who just spent 6 hours fighting cave trolls with a human child. I'm fantastic. I laughed, hurting my ribs, thanks. For back there. For not, you know, eating kale. Malakor snorted, he's barely D-rank. Not worth the effort. Low blow. He started it. He had a point, and honestly. That was the first time in 4 years I'd genuinely laughed at something, not the forced sarcastic laugh I'd learned to use in the mess hall, but a real one, the kind that makes your ribs hurt even more. Then I pushed off the tree. Come on. We need to figure out where we're going. The Vanguard will send real forces soon, S-rank marshals, the Sacred Seven. Can't exactly camp out here. Malakor nodded, his expression shifting from amused to focused. The capital. Ethelgard. Why the capital? Because that's where the answers are. And that's where your so-called guild master is about to learn that his secret is out. I looked at him, the ancient, scarred, 8-foot void demon who'd just become my only friend in the world, then said, with a shrug, okay. To the capital. But if we get stopped by any more bounty hunters on the way, you're doing the talking. I'm terrible at negotiations. Malakor grinned, his first real smile. It was unsettling. In a good way. Deal, he said. But if they insult the snacks again, I'm eating them. Deal. And we started walking, toward the capital, toward answers, toward whatever the hell was coming next. The walk to the capital took 6 hours through forest and farmland, Malakor explaining the history of the Void Monarchs like I'd grown up under a rock while I tried to explain seeding and metagaming to a being who'd existed since before the concept of games was invented. How would you describe your ranking system to someone who's been in a dungeon for 4 centuries? I asked after the third time. Malakor asked, what is an S rank? And he replied, dead serious, imagine a spreadsheet. Works perfectly. We had a system debate about whether the awakening assessment should be based on raw power or potential. Malakor argued for a kill count system. I argued that would just reward people who were good at killing, which was kind of a problem we already had. He conceded the point after I explained that Kale was S rank and Kale was the worst person I knew. And then around midday, we heard screams, ahead through the trees, smoke, a village on fire, bandits, not monsters, not void spawn, just human garbage with swords and no moral compass, raiding a farmstead, cornering a family outside their cottage. The father was trying to fight them off with a pitchfork, the mother holding 2 children and shielding them with her body, and I didn't think, just moved, halfway down the slope before Malakor caught up, moving surprisingly fast for someone 8 feet tall in void-forged armor, his giant hand on my shoulder stopping me. Let me handle this, he said, voice low, you're gonna eat them. I'm not going to eat them. I'm going to make them reconsider their life choices. The bandits, 5 of them armed with swords and crossbows, turned. Their leader, a scarred man with a cruel grin and a sword that looked like it hadn't seen a whetstone in months, laughed. Well, well. Look what wandered into the ambush. A hero. From the path. E rank, from the look of you. You gonna talk us to death, kid? I opened my mouth, and soul resonance flared, not through me, but through Malakor, who'd positioned himself behind me like a dark specter. The bandits' eyes went wide, one of them literally dropped his crossbow, it clattered to the ground, and Malakor said, voice quiet, almost casual, but the ground trembled, the trees shook, a flock of birds took off in a panicked cloud. I wouldn't recommend that approach. The last person who threatened this one spent 3 days as a decoration in my dungeon. He was a very attractive skeleton by the end of it. Cute. Very macabre. Good conversation starter for parties. The bandit leader looked at Malakor, then at me, then back at Malakor, his face going through the 5 stages of grief in about 4 seconds, denial, anger, bargaining, depression, and finally acceptance, and he whispered, terrified, you're him. The Void Lord. The nursery rhyme. You're real. Malakor didn't respond, just stared at him with those ancient, terrible, utterly bored crimson eyes. The bandits dropped every weapon, left their horses, just ran like hell itself was breathing down their necks. I turned to the family, the father still holding his pitchfork, his wife clutching 2 children to her chest, both staring at Malakor like he was the apocalypse. It wasn't me, I said, gesturing at Malakor. He's the one you should be thanking. The father looked at Malakor, then slowly, very slowly, lowered himself to his knees, his wife following, the children too, forehead on the dirt. Thank you, great lord. The kingdom says you're evil. A villain. But you saved our family. Thank you. And something in my chest cracked open. 4 years of being called trash, mocked, betrayed, laughed at everywhere I went, and now this man, whose name I didn't even know, was kneeling in the dust thanking me, not Malakor, me. I helped him up, told him to stop bowing, told him it was just doing the right thing. Anyone would have done it, which wasn't true. Most people would have kept walking, but I wasn't going to argue with a man who'd just called me great lord with genuine sincerity. We're heading for the capital, I said. Be careful. The vanguard is hunting me. And Malakor. If anyone asks, you never saw us. Kale is a lying weasel and the kingdom has been lying about both of us for 4 centuries. The father nodded vigorously, and his eldest son, maybe 10 years old with a face streaked with soot, stepped forward and held out a small, slightly crushed loaf of bread, warm from the bandit fire. For your journey, he said, quiet, brave, like he was talking to a king, not a 19-year-old with a chain and a void demon. I took it, told the family to evacuate the village immediately and head for the capital, warned them the vanguard wouldn't be coming to help for at least a week. The boy looked at Malakor, then slowly, very slowly, reached out and touched the space between Malakor's horns, like petting a golden retriever. Malakor didn't move, didn't flinch, didn't even sigh, just stood there while a 10-year-old farm boy petted the most feared being in the kingdom, and the boy asked, completely serious. Can I have an autograph? I pulled out a scrap of parchment and a charred stick from the bandit fire. Malakor made a mark on it, a perfect, elegant rune in a script I didn't recognize. The boy took it like a sacred relic from a god. We left the village within the hour, the sun climbing higher, the bread still warm in my pack. After about a mile of walking in comfortable silence through the peaceful forest, birds singing again, the bandit horses probably still running, I said to Malakor, lightly teasing, "You know you're a total softie, right? I am the Void Reaper. You let a 10-year-old pet you. And you signed his parchment." He didn't answer, just kept walking, and I followed, heading deeper into the forest where dappled sunlight filtered through the canopy onto the mossy trail. 2 hours later we came across an area of ancient burial mounds, weathered gravestones worn by time, carvings showing heroes like Kale with swords raised standing over monster corpses, and another carving, a pitch-black winged figure with a companion human standing beside it, both looking up at the sky as if guarding this place together, and Malakor stopped in front of it, eyes tracing the worn lines, and said, "The second time that day with genuine feeling, that was when Alara called me a friend. About 500 years ago. Before the kingdom started cramming me into nursery rhymes for toddlers. One more hour of walking, and the sky began darkening unnaturally, dome-shaped black clouds forming from the direction of the capital. Malakor stopped, his crimson eyes narrowing, and he said, voice no longer light, "The outer seal is breaking." Did he do it? Is he using the vessel to siphon energy from the seal like a living battery? I saw the star chart, I said. Kale marked the X at depth 23. 4 years. Every single day. Then we have very little time, Malakor said, picking up the pace, and I followed, breath coming faster, because now I understood, what Kale was doing wasn't just killing Malakor, he was breaking something worse than a breached titan loose from its chains. Dusk fell as we finally saw the towering walls of the capital Ethelgard ahead through the valley, 100 times taller, ancient gray stone, golden lanterns on the gates lighting up the skyline, and Malakor stopped, looking up at the walls like he was remembering something very distant. The last time I saw this place was 412 years ago, he said, his voice almost nostalgic. It was smaller then. When I used to protect it. And I suddenly understood a part of the story nobody had ever written down. Malakor wasn't an invader who'd been imprisoned. He was a protector who'd been abandoned. Malakor stepped out from the tree line, heavy void-armored footsteps thudding on the packed earth toward the figures standing guard at the city gate. A guard turned around, raised his lantern, the golden light catching the two curved horns and the burning crimson eyes of the creature standing before him. Then his shield clattered to the ground. Malakor didn't need any special skill, didn't need to activate void collapse or shadow dominion, just stood there, darkness pouring from his wings. Like a thick liquid, enveloping the gate in a black mist. I have returned, Malakor said, his voice resonating through the gate, reaching the farthest corner of the city, and the first thing I want to hear is which of your kingdom's leaders has been spinning lies about me long enough to make nursery rhymes for children. The guard ran back inside the city, the heavy iron gate grinding shut behind them, and Malakor turned to me, crimson eyes meeting mine directly. This is where it begins. And you will stand beside me. In the darkness of the gate, I touched the chain hanging at my hip, the void-forged flail, formerly a useless E-rank weapon, and floating text appeared in the air, visible only to me, monarchy bond, integrated evolution threshold reached. Attribute synchronization. Field expansion. And then another name I'd grown used to, a name that made my chest tighten when I read it, Kale Voss, S-rank, Vanguard Special Operations Commander, and beneath it, text I knew was false, I knew was written by Malakor himself, but now I also knew it was far too late to trust anyone other than the void demon standing beside me. I closed my eyes, took a deep breath, feeling the current of void energy slowly flowing through my veins, not dark and terrifying, but warm, like a strange and familiar tide, then opened my eyes to face the sealed city gate ahead. Inside it the entire kingdom that had called me trash, laughed in my face, thrown tomatoes on the stage of my assessment, and now I knew where I was going, inside, with the demon who'd chosen me, the skill that had chosen Malakor, and both of us too tired of everyone else writing our stories for us. Malakor raised a hand, his enormous finger curving slightly toward the gate without needing to knock, and the heavy gate swung open on its own with a powerful creak, as if the stone itself recognized who was standing outside. Golden light poured out from inside the city, illuminating both of us, a 19-year-old boy standing in golden light from the ground, a 10-foot void demon behind him, his dark shadow stretching across the stone like liquid, and I was no longer Jax Mercer E-rank, I was the one bonded to the Void Lord, and moving forward was no longer a choice, it was destiny. Inside the gate, the capital of Ethelgard was waking to morning, street vendors lining up along the cobblestone streets, knights on horseback patrolling, children running into the road with bread in their hands, and none of them noticed the 10-foot demon and the E-rank nobody who just walked through their city gate, until a guard looked up, saw the black chain-shaped shadow stretching across the stone, saw the burning crimson eyes between two great horns, and screamed, the sound rippling through the city person by person, faces turning, looks of horror spreading across the crowd like someone had just blown out a candle they were reading by. Malakor made no effort to hide, no attempt to conceal his wings or any sign of his identity, and he walked down the main street at a slow, deliberate pace with me beside him as the people parted, not from respect, but from sheer terror, pure fear so strong that a woman dropped her shopping basket and ran clutching her child, a man prostrated himself and crawled behind a merchant cart, and I realized, this wasn't the feeling of a hero. This was something else. Something I'd never experienced in 4 years of E-rank presence. We walked straight to the palace, where Guild Master Aurelius held his headquarters, where the S-rank officers met, where the Sacred Seven kept their black armor filled with the kingdom's deepest secrets, and Malakor stopped before the great oak doors of the palace, touching the weathered wood surface. I've been inside this place long enough to know what's in there, he said. This time, I'm not going alone. I tightened my grip on the chain at my hip, the void-forged flail of the E-rank, once useless, now part of something far greater, and pushed the heavy oak doors open. The wood groaned as it moved, the sound echoing through the grand palace hall, up to the top floor office of Guild Master Aurelius, where he sat behind his mahogany desk with the star chart showing the exit depth 23, and when the sound reached his ears he knew the men he'd left for dead at the bottom of the dungeon had returned, accompanied by the very creature he'd spent 4 years using as a machine, siphoning power from to measure the kingdom's true strength, to nourish the Sacred Seven, to maintain his own grip on power, and his time was up. Inside Guild Master Aurelius's office, the desk lamp's warm light fell across the star chart with blue and gold dots marking targets, including one small, steady red dot out on the western forest fringe. That was me, per the wanted posters, and Aurelius froze. This man, the nameless, rankless, worthless nobody, was still alive, and he was heading toward the palace, accompanied by that thing, and he pressed the bell on his desk, a sharp metallic sound ringing out for the Sacred Seven, for the Special Operations Unit, for every weapon the kingdom could mobilize in an instant, because he knew, since Kale's failure report from the Nest of the Fallen, that the Khan was up, and with it, the entire kingdom built upon it. Standing outside the palace gates, I could feel the wave of energy pouring from within, the main hall, the S-rank training grounds, the relic vault, the Sacred Seven's topmost penthouse, and my soul resonance, now upgraded to Monarch's Bond, spread outward, opening, sensing every creature within Malakor's territory turning their heads toward the capital, because their lord had returned, and Malakor stood beside me, not needing to know what was happening inside. He only knew one thing: he was no longer imprisoned. When Kale appeared at the top of the palace stairs, full golden armor, immaculate, sword in hand, flanked by enough vanguard special forces to start a small war, the S-rank officers, battle mages, the first of the Sacred Seven at his back, he spoke with the same steady authoritative voice I'd known since childhood. Mercer, you actually came here. With it, the kingdom has issued a warrant for your arrest. High treason. Harboring a significant void entity. I didn't flinch, didn't step back, just stood my ground, the chain at my hip growing warm with my breathing. Really? I said, voice level and calm, tell Aurelius to come down here. I'm not talking to mercenaries. I'm talking to the men who built this fraud. Kale's eyes narrowed. You're not here to negotiate. You're here to surrender. Surrender to who? I said, glancing at Malakor, my hand brushing lightly against his forearm, warmth from the void current running through his skin into mine. Him. After your own guild left me to die. After Kale himself cut the rope dropping me into that shaft. After Aurelius himself used monster Malakor as a battery for 4 years. The area before the palace fell silent, so quiet the wind through the constellation patterns on the roof tiles became audible, and then a tall S-rank knight stepped out from the Sacred Seven ranks, black polished armor, full-face iron mask showing only the eyes, a blue glowing sword tip on his weapon. This was the man who'd stood at the peak of the Nest of the Fallen when the Breach Titan appeared, who'd watched Kale get thrown aside, who'd watched the Titan win, and now he looked at me, not with E-rank contempt, but with the quiet humility of someone who'd faced something far larger than any weapon in his hand. Jax Mercer, he said, voice low, honest. I saw you down there. We left you. I offer no greeting. I met the S-rank knight's gaze without speaking, only nodded, a small acknowledgement between two people who'd both been in the same abyss. Then Malakor stepped onto the palace's front steps, shadow from his wings stretching up the stone tiers, spreading across the sealed doors, as if even the ancient stone recognized the scale of his presence, and he spoke, voice resonating through the entire capital to its farthest edges. Guild Master Aurelius. Come out. We have things to discuss. 1 minute of silence, 2, then the second floor door opened and a man stepped out, gray hair, cold hard eyes, dark blue robe with the Vanguard hound and gold crest on the chest, descending the steps with deliberate, unhurried steps. When he stopped before Malakor, his head barely reaching the void demon's chest, but his gaze never wavered. Malakor, he said, voice even, like speaking to a sick pet. You're alive. I failed. And I once thought you were smarter than this, Aurelius, Malakor replied, voice rumbling like deep underground thunder. You used the vessel to siphon energy from my seal, didn't you? You thought 4 years was enough to steal power from something that cannot be stolen. You thought the Sacred Seven would balance the energy you create by warping an ancient life form. You were wrong. And now it's far too late for complaints. Aurelius blinked, once, and I flinched because that was something he'd never done with anyone in his life, a genuine moment of disorientation. The men who'd run the guild for nearly a century almost losing his composure. You're telling the truth. You have a star chart in your vault, Aurelius. You can verify the X at depth 23 for yourself before Kale drains every last drop of energy remaining. Kale stood beside Aurelius, face pale, eyes wide, and I added, voice dropping to something dangerously soft, you knew, didn't you? You heard the screams from down there. But you let it happen. Because you saw the benefit. Malakor stepped toward the great stone door leading down to the palace dungeon, and spoke with a voice of strange clarity, I will go down there. I will stabilize whatever remains of the seal. But I need your cooperation, not because I demand it, but because if the seal breaks completely before I get down there, what's inside isn't just a breach titan. It's something the gate was built to keep contained, and it will show no mercy. I tightened my grip on the chain at my hip, feeling the warmth of that dark iron link, the weapon that had saved my life 12 times in the dungeon, and decided to go down with him, not because I had to, not because the kingdom demanded it, but because I understood the vessel better than anyone. I'd seen the star chart in Kale's vault, I'd seen the truth the Vanguard had buried, and I couldn't stand at the top of the stairs watching, not this time, not weak enough to do nothing. One of the Sacred Seven stepped forward, polished black armor gleaming, a full face mask of iron hiding their features, speaking with the deep authoritative voice forged from 2 centuries of combat experience. You are 19 years old. E rank. You think you can go down there? That place kills S rank. I looked straight into the iron mask, speaking slowly, each word measured and clear. An E-rank talked to a void demon imprisoned for 4 centuries in a dungeon. An E-rank talked to a breach titan while it was about to kill him. Don't worry, he's still standing. You can posture with your armor, but at least I didn't need armor to look a void demon in the eye that the kingdom taught everyone to fear. The Sacred Seven member fell silent, then stepped aside without another word, and the great iron door leading down to the palace dungeon creaked open. Void darkness poured out from within as if the place had been waiting for us to return. Malakor stepped inside first, wings folding, posture straight, no hesitation, and I followed, gripping the chain flail at my hip, walking down the stone staircase into the dark. I had no idea what waited below, but I knew one thing, I wasn't alone down here. Anymore. The palace dungeon was colder than the forest dungeon, its stone walls older, covered in ancient lichen, carved with murals depicting the void lords throughout history. Malakor was the last of them, and on one mural there was a pitch-black winged figure standing alongside a human companion, both looking up at the sky as if guarding this place together. I touched the cold stone, feeling the history through layers of lichen and rock, realizing this mural had never been finished, until now. The deeper we went, the colder it became, until my breath crystallized into white mist before my face. Malakor stopped before a great metal door covered in ancient rune script, his crimson eyes narrowing, and he said, voice low, almost careful, this is the outer seal. Still intact. But the vessel is underneath, where no one goes, and it won't hold in this state for much longer. I looked at the rune-carved metal door, the faintly glowing characters in the darkness, understanding this was the final boundary between something larger than a breach titan and the world I'd once known. Malakor placed his hand on the metal door's surface, and the runes lit up, not with white or gold like ordinary magic, but with cold blue ice light, seeping through the metal's crevices. A soft hum resonated through the chamber, the great door swinging open with the ancient mechanism sound after 4 centuries of silence, and behind it wasn't a room, but a vast open space larger than a city stadium, where a great dark artifact floated in midair, a black sphere covered in ancient lichen. Slowly rotating, emitting a faint purple energy so cold and powerful I felt my monarch's bond tingle in reactive alarm throughout my body. It was the vessel. The thing Kale had been siphoning energy from for 4 years. The thing Aurelius used to nourish the Sacred Seven. The thing holding something even larger. Inside the black sphere I could make out a shadowy entity, neither monster nor human, something caught between 2 worlds, trapped in the dimensional space the vessel maintained, and Malakor saw it, his crimson eyes narrowing, and he said, voice rasping, genuinely stunned, the old lord. He's still alive. This vessel was the seal meant to hold him. Kale is breaking that seal from the inside, just as Aurelius intended. I looked at the vessel, at the purple energy being drawn outward through rusted iron pipes running down the walls into the earth below, at Aurelius's face on the control monitor managing the energy flow, and I understood the entire con. The Sacred Seven weren't heroes protecting the kingdom, they were energy conduits, nourished by the power of the old lord imprisoned below, forced to serve while pretending to be independent warriors, and the kingdom itself was just a stage built around this vast machine beneath the capital palace. Malakor approached the vessel, wings folding loose but footsteps slow, deliberate, and as he drew near the purple energy reacted, flaring brighter, recognizing the being who had once been half of it, who had been part of what was sealed inside. Then Malakor raised his hand, needing no weapon, no special skill, just extended his enormous finger to touch the surface of the black sphere, and a sound rang out, not metal or breaking, but the sound of dimensional space being sealed, the sound of a 4-century-old curse drawing its final breath. When Malakor touched the vessel, the purple energy abruptly redirected, no longer flowing out to nourish the Sacred Seven, but flowing into him, merging into his void body, into his wings, into his finger, into his eyes, and I felt the shock through my monarch's bond, energy exploding through my veins like I was the conduit pipe itself, ancient energy older than the kingdom, older than the vessel itself, older than Malakor's void power, and I stood firm, didn't fall, didn't scream, didn't falter, just held the chain tight at my hip, feeling it all flow through me, recording every surge, every promise, every belief. Inside the vessel, behind the thin wall of energy, the old lord opened his eyes, 2 ancient deep blue spheres of unknowable age, and looked at Malakor, looked at me, and something like a smile spread across what passed for a face, vast and wide enough to hold an entire world inside. He'd waited 4 centuries for this, for someone to come and disconnect the vessel instead of stealing its energy, for someone to see what was locked inside was not a power source but a living being, and that the human beside him was not something to control but an ally. Malakor pulled his hand back, and the vessel went dark, completely black, no more energy emanating, no more spinning, holding nothing inside anymore. It drifted slowly downward into a trapezoidal recess in the stone floor, as if the stone itself welcomed what was inside back home after 4 centuries trapped between 2 worlds, and when it touched the bottom a soft, genuinely beautiful sound rang out, like 2 worlds singing the same note in perfect harmony, resonating through the dungeon, through the palace, through the entire kingdom of Ethelgard to its smallest corners. I felt through my monarch's bond the old lord's release from the vessel's chains, a great relief, a joy, the feeling of someone opening their eyes after a 4-century sleep, not from rest but from imprisonment, from battle, from getting caught in humanity's schemes, and I understood. Malakor's SSS-ranked power, all his sealed abilities, all the weariness of 4 centuries in that dungeon, it was all free now, because the vessel hadn't been sealing Malakor. It had been sealing the old lord, and all this time, Malakor had been protecting this place, protecting that seal, even when the kingdom called him a monster. Aurelius on the stairs, eyes wide, mouth slightly open, holding the doorframe to keep from falling, and I knew he was seeing, the status screens blazing in the air above us, the old lord rising from the floor recess in full majesty, Malakor standing beside me, wings of void unfurled, no more chains, no more imprisonment, and he understood, finally, he understood he'd been wrong from the very first step, that he'd used a protector as a trap, that the kingdom he'd built on lies, on killing, on exploiting a living being was starting to collapse at its very foundation. Kale stood beside Aurelius, sword tremoring in his hand, and this time it wasn't from pain or injury, this time it was genuine fear, pure terror, finally realizing the void demon his former friend had bonded with, the demon he'd thought he could control, could use as a stepping stone to S-rank, the demon he'd mocked in front of friends. That this demon's consciousness had been negotiating with me for 4 years at the bottom of a dungeon while I was still just a nobody E-rank no one would look at, and he understood that when he'd cut that rope, he hadn't just eliminated a rival E-rank, he'd woken up something larger than the entire kingdom he was sworn to protect. "Let's go," I said, quiet, no anger, no laughter, no pity, just resolve, gripping the chain at my hip, looking at Kale one last time, looking at the childhood friend who died the day I got my E-rank assessment, looking at the hollow thing wearing his face now, the S-rank officer who was just a shadow of the boy who once cried about injustice, and said, "Remember, I'm not running away. I'm leaving. And I will come back. Not with guild authority. Not with a golden sword. But with the truth. The truth you've been hiding for 4 years." I followed Malakor out of the palace dungeon, up the stone staircase, through the open gate, out into the capital streets as crowds scattered in every direction like water pushed aside, golden sunset light washing orange and pink over the rooftops, and as two figures, a 19-year-old boy with a black chain flail at his hip, and a 10-foot void demon whose dark wings dragged across the stone, walked through the city gates heading west into the forest, I felt the air change. It wasn't the air of a fugitive escaping. It was the air of something new, something that had never existed in this kingdom's history, an alliance. As our silhouettes sank into the forest, sunset gave way to night, and for the first time since its upgrade, soul resonance slowly spread outward, sensing the shadow creatures in the surrounding woodlands, low-level void entities, forest wraiths, night wolves thick with fur, and every one of them went still, not out of fear, but recognition. The Void Lord had returned, but this time he wasn't alone. He walked with the human the Void Lord had chosen, and above all, he moved by his own free will, walking beside a human of his own volition, and the entire forest went quiet, waiting for whatever came next. I looked back at the capital one last time, ancient mossy stone walls, the gate sealed behind us, golden lantern light on the watchtowers, and I no longer saw it as a home, no longer as a place I'd ever belonged, but as a great fraud I'd finally woken up from. I was no longer Jax Mercer E-rank, the failure, the reject, the joke. I was the one who'd forged a bond with the Void Lord, and what I built next wouldn't be with lies, with rank assignments, with grades on paper, it would be with truth, with choice, and with a Trader Joe's brown sugar granola bar and a squished apple in an ancient dungeon. Malakor walked beside me through the dark forest, wings folded in silence, and said, voice low, almost a whisper, "Hey, Jax. Yeah. If we keep going, if we do what you just said, face the whole kingdom, face the Sacred Seven, face Aurelius and Kale and all of its history of wrongs, I can't promise it'll be easy." "I know," I replied, gripping the chain, feeling warmth from the void-forged material within. It had become part of me, just as Malakor had become my friend, but at least this time, I'm choosing. I'm choosing to keep going. Not because anyone forced me. Not because the guild or the rank or whatever reputation those people manufactured. But because I see something better ahead, that I can make this world different. I might still be E-rank on paper. But paper doesn't measure what you and I did down there today. Malakor stopped, turned to face me, the two crimson spheres bright in the dark forest, and a smile appeared on his face, a real smile, not meant to threaten, not meant to mock, genuinely warm, the kind of smile no one in 7 centuries of his life had ever seen on his face. "Then let's move," he said, voice warmer than any words he'd ever spoken, and we both walked westward, into the deep forest where the monarch's bond energy between us spread far outward, to the shadow creatures waiting. To the villages that needed protection, to a future no one in this kingdom had ever foreseen, that the imprisoned demon and the worthless E-rank nobody would change everything, starting from half a granola bar, a squished apple, and 2 weary souls who'd finally found each other in an ancient dungeon. The rune was a protection ward. If he's ever in danger it'll burn and he'll know help is coming. It's a practical gesture, not a softy gesture, and I stopped walking and said, seriously. While Malakor didn't slow down and said that 4 centuries of napping in a dungeon gives you a lot of time to practice calligraphy, and also the kid who received the rune reminded him of a village he protected in 1273 before he got bored, before the kingdom decided he was a monster, a village that made honey cakes which he still dreams about sometimes, and that kid's bread was similar, not as good but similar. I caught up to Malakor and said, you know, for a terror of the age, you're surprisingly domestic, and Malakor said, thank you, and we kept walking through the forest that thinned into a proper dirt path, passing more villages, some damaged from the breached Titan's rampage, most untouched, people staring at Malakor as we passed, a few crossing themselves, one old woman throwing a turnip at him that Malakor caught, examined, and then ate. "Not bad," Malakor said of the turnip, "a bit earthy," and I said, "Can we maybe not eat random vegetables thrown at us by superstitious peasants?" And Malakor replied, "I'm an adventurer. I eat what I find," and I said, "You're a Void Lord," and he said, "I'm a Void Lord with an appetite," and just like that we kept walking as the sun climbed higher. By afternoon we could see the capital on the horizon, Ethelgard, 7 distinct districts stacked atop each other like a child's building blocks, the Crystal District floating above the clouds catching the sunlight like a diamond, the Forge Quarter thundering with hammers and industry, and at the highest point the Royal Academy glowing with eternal purple enchantment. "This is where it all began," Malakor said, going quiet since we left the village with a weight in his voice, not sadness exactly but something older and heavier. "The Sacred Seven founded the kingdom here. Built their capital on the bones of the Void Temple." "My temple." "Wait," I said, completely stopping in my tracks, "they built their capital on your temple." And Malakor explained they didn't build it so much as repurposed it. The Void Temple was the seat of the monarchs, and when the first human king Ethel decided he wanted to rule the world, he killed the high priest, declared this ground holy, rewrote every history book to say it was always his, called Malakor a demon, and called the Void monarchs ancient terrors, when they were really just moderately inconvenienced bureaucrats of cosmic power. "Bureaucrats," I said, surprised, and Malakor confirmed, "We had a filing system. Very organized. The humans had no filing system. They just winged it. With swords. And fire. And a very annoying amount of charisma, so I marveled that the Void Lords were just organized civil servants of the cosmos," and Malakor corrected me, "The Void Lords were the original civil servants until a bunch of show-off humans with swords and very good hair decided they wanted their office space and took it through genocide but made it sound heroic in the history books." I looked out at the capital, beautiful from up here with golden spires and lanterns flickering to life, people moving through the streets laughing and living their lives, and underneath it all, literally physically underneath, was a Void Temple built on bones and lies, and I asked, "Where do we start?" So Malakor said, "Find Marnie, the alchemist. Her grandfather owned this temple before the Sacred Seven purged it. She knows the tunnels and the secrets," and when I asked, "Marnie who? How do you know her?" Malakor explained that his predecessor, the previous Void Reaper, granted her family a favor in 1743, the contract has a 1,000-year expiration, and we're well within the window, to which I replied, "Of course. The ancient Void Demon has alchemist loyalty tokens. Why am I not surprised?" We descended into the city through the sewers, not my first choice of entrance, but Malakor insisted the surface routes were infested with Sacred Seven patrols and bounty hunters, while the sewers were at least only infested with rats, and Malakor got along with the rats apparently because they respected authority. We found Marnie's shop in the lower slums called Harlow's Potion Shop with a peeling sign, a cracked window, and a door off its hinges that looked about as abandoned as a shop could look without actually being a crime scene, and then Malakor knocked and his giant fist went right through the doorframe and punched a hole in the wood. "Oops," Malakor said, and then the door opened and a girl with purple hair and a messy bun wearing a leather apron stained with every color of the rainbow looked out, maybe 20 years old with incredibly tired eyes and a warm smile that didn't reach those eyes because she'd seen too much, and absolutely zero fear in her face as she took in the 8-foot Void Demon in her doorway. "Grandpa's journal was right," she said, "you owe me. Come in. And for the record, if you're gonna sit on the furniture you're paying for it, that couch is older than our kingdom," and her name was Marnie Harlow. Her grandfather Horace Harlow had been the kingdom's greatest alchemist and a secret Void Temple archivist before the Sacred Seven purged the temple and burned every record of the Void monarchs. Her shop was a front and the basement was the real operation, and she had 3 years of black market intelligence, maps of every tunnel in the capital, and contacts in every guild, noble house, and criminal organization within 100 miles. "The Sacred Seven has a hit out on both of you," Marnie said, spreading a detailed map across her basement table, "dead or alive, dead preferred, and they're not just hunting you for Malakor though, they're hunting you for something else, something you found in the dungeon." And when Malakor said, "the vessel," Marnie nodded and explained that Guild Master Aurelius found it 4 years ago, tried to unlock it, couldn't get past the curse, but has been secretly draining its power using it to boost the Sacred Seven's weapons, every holy blade, every blessed armor, every enchanted relic the kingdom uses to fight void spawn powered by her temple's heart. And if Aurelius unlocks the full vessel's power? Marnie asked, and then answered her own question, Then he doesn't need the Sacred Seven or the kingdom or anyone. He could rewrite the awakening system itself and make himself the sole god of this realm. You didn't just find a dungeon relic, Jax. You found the key to the most powerful weapon in existence, and Aurelius has been sitting on it for 4 years, sipping from it like it's a fine wine. The room went cold, not poetically but actually. The temperature dropped about 10 degrees as Malakor's void energy flared unconsciously. The candles flickered and died, and Malakor said with tight emotion, for the first time since I'd met him, he has my temple. He's been draining my temple. My power. For 4 years, and I said simply, then we stop him. Marnie and Malakor both looked at me like I'd grown a second head, and Marnie asked, how? He's the guild master of the most powerful mercenary guild in the kingdom. He's got the Sacred Seven in his pocket. He's got enough void energy to level the capital. What are you gonna do? Ask him nicely. So I said no. I don't have a plan. Not yet. But I know one thing, I'm not running anymore. Not from Kale. Not from the Vanguard. Not from the Sacred Seven. I'm going to build something he can't touch, something he can't kill with a sword or a curse or a cheap political maneuver, something made of people. People he's forgotten. People he's thrown away. Marnie studied me for a long moment, then smiled, a real one, and asked, how much time do we have? And I said 2 days. Then the Sacred Seven expands their search to every safe house in the capital, and she laughed a sharp bright sound. 2 days to build an army from the gutter. I like this. Grandpa would have liked you. Who was your grandpa, exactly? I asked, and she said, the last person to tell the Sacred Seven to go to hell. They burned him at the stake in 1743 for void heresy. His last words were, tell Alpha 9 I said he owed me a drink, and I looked at Malakor, who was grinning, and I thought, this was gonna be fun. 48 hours, that's what we had before Seraphina Whitehair and the full force of the Sacred Seven descended on every safe house in the capital. 48 hours to build something from nothing, and Marnie was a machine who in just 6 hours had connected us with every underground network in the city, the black market merchants who'd been smuggling void cult survivors, rogue mages exiled from the academy for studying forbidden void magic, and factory workers in the Forge Quarter, breathing toxic fumes for pennies while Aurelius siphoned void energy beneath their feet. When I told the factory workers what was really happening, that their boss was draining a cosmic power source while they got sick from the fumes, that their salaries were being paid with blood money, they didn't need convincing, they needed weapons, and by hour 24 we had 50 people, by hour 36 100, and by hour 48 200. None of them soldiers or fighters but people the kingdom had thrown away, all looking at me, 19 years old, E-rank, covered in dungeon dust, flanked by an 8-foot void demon, like I was their last hope. I stood in front of them in Marnie's basement, 200 faces, some scared, some angry, all tired of being stepped on, and spoke for the first time with steady voice since leaving the Vanguard. They gave up on me. 4 years ago at the Awakening assessment the whole kingdom laughed at me, called me trash, my own family looked at me like a mistake, the Vanguard left me in a dungeon to die. I paused to let them feel it, then continued, but you, every one of you, have been treated worse. Cast aside. Forgotten. Told you don't matter. The kingdom says you're the trash, the refuse, the garbage, and I'm here to tell you something, they're wrong. My hand burned at my side as the soul resonance mark on my wrist pulsed with warm dark light, and I could feel the D-rank creatures out there, the shadow wolves, the cave slugs, the bat swarms, responding to the monarch's echo. They were coming, my real army that didn't need weapons or armor or promises of glory, the one that followed because I'd chosen them to in a dungeon full of darkness. Today, we stop running, I declared. Today, we stop letting them write our stories. Today, we take back what they stole from us, and as I finished speaking the basement door exploded inward, dust and debris flying, and standing in the doorway was Kale in full battle armor flanked by 10 Vanguard elites, with the Sacred Seven floating serenely behind them in white and gold armor like space marines from a holy order, all 7 of them radiant and terrifying. Traitors, Kale spat, voice echoing in the suddenly silent basement, monsters. Every kind of filth the kingdom ever tried to wash away. Step away from the Void Lord, Mercer. Now, and I looked at the Sacred Seven, at Seraphina Whitehair the Void Witch with silver eyes locked on Malakor, at Aurora Lightbringer the leader with her holy sword glowing bright enough to cast shadows across the room, and then I said loud enough for every single person in that basement to hear, hey, everyone. If you're not human you can come out now, please. The basement's getting crowded. Then came the sound from the walls, from the floor, from the ceiling, the basement shaked, cracks appeared in the stonework, and from every direction my army poured in like a dark tide, skeletons in rusted armor with jawbones hanging loose, shadow wolves with glowing red eyes, cave trolls ducking their heads to fit through the doorframe, giant spiders the size of trash cans with legs clicking on stone, even the dungeon slime king oozing through a crack in the foundation like it owned the place. They formed ranks behind me, 100, then 200, then 300 creatures of every shape and size and threat level, all of them looking at me, all of them waiting, and Kale's jaw dropped, his sword hand slowing, because for the first time in his life the golden boy of the vanguard had absolutely no idea what to do. What the hell is this? Kale yelled, and I said, turning back to the Sacred Seven with a smile that was not entirely sane, this is what happens when you call someone trash for too long. Eventually they stop being trash. And start being your nightmare. The Sacred Seven didn't negotiate, they fought. Seraphina was first, silver-white hair streaming, void magic coiling around her fingers like living smoke. She hurled a lance of pure void energy designed to rip through both flesh and soul, her signature move that she'd practiced on dungeon creatures for 20 years, and Malakor caught it with one hand like it was a dandelion, the shockwave flattening the first 3 rows of my dungeon army while Malakor didn't flinch and said, "Sharpen your aim," which before crushing the void lance in his fist like a styrofoam cup, the void energy dissipating like smoke. Seraphina's face twisted with rage. She'd spent 20 years hunting him, 20 years of failure always falling just short, and now he was treating her best attack like a mosquito bite, so she hit him with everything, void storms that ripped the air itself, shadow serpents that could crush diamond, dark energy blasts that would have leveled a city block, and Malakor took it all, absorbed it, like he was drinking from a fire hose, growing stronger with each attack. "You're feeding me," he roared, voice filling the basement like thunder. "Your void magic is my void magic. Every spell you cast just makes me stronger. Have you not read your own history books? The void witch power is derived from the same source as the void lord. You've been attacking the source of your own strength for 2 decades and you never figured it out." And Seraphina froze, hands dropping, the realization hitting her like a physical blow. The void which had been drawing power from the same source as the void lord himself, every spell, every technique, every ounce of her strength came from him. "Now," Malakor said, turning slowly to face Aurora Lightbringer, the woman made of literal holy light who could burn a city to ash with a single gesture, "we were having a conversation. Do you want to continue it? Or do you want to keep dancing?" And Aurora's holy sword, forged from the first light of creation set to cut through reality itself, gleamed in the basement's dim light while her 7 companions flanked her, each radiating insane power, together the most dangerous force in the kingdom. "You murdered thousands," Aurora said, voice steady as stone though her hands trembled around the hilt of her sacred blade, "the long winter of 892. The fallen citadel. 3 villages in the northern reaches. You didn't just fight, you annihilated, and I will not stand here and listen to you justify it," but Malakor said quietly, "I'm not justifying anything. I did those things. And I've regretted every single one of them for 400 years, and the basement went so quiet you could hear a rat scurrying in the wall. It wasn't the battle I regret," Malakor continued, his ancient eyes suddenly very tired, "it was the aftermath. The kingdom had built their capital on my temple, murdered my priests, stolen my people's power source, and every time I tried to fight back they called me demon and monster and terror, wrote nursery rhymes about me, told their children I was the reason the harvest failed and the winter was cold, so I raged, and yes I destroyed things, I hurt people, innocent people." And he looked at Aurora, really looked at her not as a Sacred Seven warrior but as a person and said, "I have carried that weight for 4 centuries, and if you want to judge me for it with your holy sword and righteous fury then do it. I won't stop you, I've earned worse, but if you attack my host I will end every single one of you before you finish your first swing and I won't feel bad about it because hurting Jax is the one thing I won't forgive." The tension in the room was so thick you could cut it with Malakor's void-forged hands. The Sacred Seven, deities among mortals each capable of leveling a small army alone, locked in a standoff with a 19-year-old E-rank mercenary, a bored void demon, and a couple hundred dungeon creatures who'd probably never seen sunlight, and Aurora's glowing blade dimmed just a little, the tiniest tell that she was wavering. "Prove it," Aurora said, and when Malakor asked, "Excuse me," she told him to take them to the vessel's location, show them what Aurelius buried, and if he was lying, if this was a trap, they'd end it right now with no trial, no mercy. So I looked at Malakor and he nodded once, and I said, "We leave at dawn. And nobody eats anyone on the way. That's the rule. We're negotiating, not catering." Malakor grumbled, "Fine. But if they insult the granola bars again, all bets are off, and then the shaft to depth 23 was dark. Obviously, I'd already been down at once face first with a rope wrapped around my ankles. This time I was walking, and Malakor led the way, remembering every twist and turn from 4 centuries of imprisonment, because when you're in a dungeon for 400 years you develop a real appreciation for architectural details. Aurora walked beside me. We'd barely spoken since the truce, but I could feel her curious eyes on me, like she was trying to figure out how a 19-year-old with an E-rank skill had done what the entire Sacred Seven couldn't, and then she asked suddenly, why him? Of all the beings in existence, why a 19-year-old E-rank mercenary? So I said, because I brought snacks, and after a moment she admitted, that's not the answer I expected, and I said, it's the honest one. The shaft bottom was exactly as I'd left it, dark, cold, damp, and there on the far wall, half buried in sediment, glowing with ancient violet light, was the vessel, more impressive up close, an hourglass where the glass wasn't quite glass and wasn't quite metal. Inside, instead of sand, a swirling galaxy of void energy mixing black light with colors I couldn't name, colors that made my eyes hurt to look at. The vessel of the void Aurelius had found and been draining for 4 years. Malakor approached slowly and reverently, placing one massive hand on the vessel's surface, saying, my temple's heart, and the void energy inside swirled, responding to him like a loyal dog recognizing its owner after years apart, explaining they had sealed this here when they destroyed the temple 4 centuries ago, and Aurelius found it and broke through the outer seal, and when Aurora asked if he unlocked it, Malakor said, partially, and described how he could feel Aurelius's tainted, greedy signature on the vessel, how he'd been siphoning power through the Sacred Seven's weapon network so that every holy blade, blessed armor, and enchanted relic was powered by his temple's heart. That's treason, Seraphina said quietly, and I said, that's Aurelius, and then Malakor spoke to me telepathically with the bond stronger near the vessel, Jax. Don't touch it with your bare hand. The curse, it consumes mortals. Takes 3 seconds, but it was too late because I'd already reached out. The vessel's energy lashed out with a tendril of pure black void wrapping around my wrist like a viper, the pain immediate, like being branded with a hot iron, burning with something colder than ice, colder than the deepest void. I yelped and tried to pull back, but the tendril tightened until Malakor's hand clamped over mine, not crushing but firm and protective. And when he pulled, the void tendril disappeared into his palm as if being absorbed by its own source, the burning fading to a warm tingle. Malakor looked down at me with genuine fear in his eyes, not for himself but for me, and said that was the consumption curse. Any mortal who touches the vessel barehanded gets consumed by the void. 3 seconds. You would have been gone, and when I looked at my wrist, a black mark shaped like a rune, a serpent eating its own tail, had appeared on my skin, pulsing slowly in time with something humming deep in my bones. I'm fine, I said, my voice shaking a little. Just adding ancient void artifact to my list of things not to touch without supervision, and Malakor's eyes went wide because he'd felt it through our bond. The vessel accepted you. It bonded to you. Just like the dungeon did. You're not just my host anymore, Jax. You're the rightful heir to everything this kingdom buried. The vessel glowed, bright, brilliant, warm, not the cold black light from before but something golden and deep and old, the swirling galaxy inside spinning faster and faster until it was a vortex of pure void and pure light intertwined, and then without warning the glass of the vessel cracked, not shattered but transformed, the crack spreading neon bright until the entire surface was a web of golden light, and the vessel showed us something with images flooding into my mind like a dream I'd been having for 19 years and just now remembered. I saw myself standing exactly where Malakor stood now, with an army behind me, not monsters but people, and a kingdom that didn't fear me or mock me but looked up to me. Then I saw Kale kneeling, not in defeat but in respect, his golden sword laid at my feet. Then I saw the Sacred Seven not hunting us but standing with us, fighting alongside a Void Lord and an E-rank mercenary against something darker and worse than the Void itself, something that had been hiding behind the Sacred Seven's light for centuries. And then the images stopped as the vessel's glow faded and the golden crack sealed, the swirling galaxy inside now showing a tiny bright star at its center, a new star, my star, and Aurora whispered. What was that? What did I just see? So Malakor said with awe in his voice, the vessel shows potential futures. Every possible future. And every single one of them has you at the center, Jax. I stared at the vessel and at my own reflection in its surface, the same tired 19-year-old face, the same E-rank mercenary who'd been called trash for half his life, and said, that can't be right. I'm E-rank. I can't even beat break in arm wrestling. I can't. But Malakor put a massive hand on my shoulder and said, "The vessel doesn't care about your rank. It cares about your soul. And your soul is the most stubborn, most resilient, most unbreakable thing I've encountered in 8 centuries of existence. You fell into my dungeon when the entire kingdom had written you off, you shared your last scrap of food with a monster everyone feared, you chose to see a person where everyone else saw a weapon. That's not an E-rank skill. That's a monarch's." Aurora lowered her holy sword, actually lowered it like she was just tired of fighting, tired of the lies, tired of being right about everything and still feeling like she was wrong, and said, "We have questions. About the vessel. About Aurelius. About why you of all beings chose to side with a 19-year-old who should have been a footnote in history." So I stepped forward and said, "That's easy. He didn't choose me. I chose him. I had a choice, run or stay and talk to the most feared being in the kingdom. I stayed. And it turns out he just needed someone to bring him a granola bar and not try to stab him. Which says more about this kingdom than it does about either of us." I held up my hand and the soul resonance mark glowed, not brightly but steadily, a warm dark light pulsing in time with Malakor's heartbeat which I could now feel in my own chest, and said, "Soul resonance. E-rank. Talk to monsters." That's what they wrote on my assessment. 4 words that destroyed my life. But they were wrong. It's not about talking. It's about listening. Really listening. Understanding something before you try to kill it. And if more people in this kingdom had actually listened, to Malakor, to the Void Cult, to the monsters they hunted, maybe this whole mess wouldn't have happened, and the Sacred Seven went silent as Aurora was the first to speak. "Take us back," Aurora said. "To the surface. To the tribunal. The kingdom needs to hear this," and when I asked, "And if they don't believe us?" Malakor said with real genuine purpose in his voice for the first time, "Then we make them. 4 centuries of lies end today. Not because we're stronger. But because we have the truth. And truth, Jax. Truth is the one thing power can never suppress for long." So I looked at the vessel and its new star burning at its center and said, "All right. Let's go tell the kingdom the truth." The climb back up the shaft felt different this time, lighter, not because the rubble was gone or the tunnel was shorter. It was exactly the same shaft I'd fallen down face first 3 days ago, but now I had Malakor beside me, I had a real weapon, I had something to fight for, and Seraphina walked beside me for most of the ascent, quiet in a way that felt heavy like she was carrying something she'd been holding for 20 years and just now realized she could put it down. "Hey," I said after we'd climbed in silence for 20 minutes, "your sister. The one Malakor tried to save. What was her name?" And Seraphina stopped walking, the dungeon fungi casting shifting shadows across her face. For a moment she looked so young, not a Void Witch or a Sacred Seven warrior but just a girl who'd lost her sister and spent 20 years blaming the wrong person, and she said quietly, "Lila," almost too quiet to hear. I nodded and said, "Malakor remembers her. Said she had braids. That she was brave. That he held her while she passed. And he never told anyone. Because he knew nobody would believe him." And Seraphina's shoulders shook just once but she kept walking and said barely audibly, "Thank you," and I didn't say anything, just kept climbing, because some things don't need words. We emerged from the dungeon at dawn, the same dawn I'd seen 3 days ago when Malakor's wings had unfurled for the first time since his imprisonment, the sun climbing the same way, the birds singing the same songs, but everything was different because now I knew what was underneath the kingdom, now I knew who the real monsters were, and they weren't in the dungeon. The surface was crowded, not with Vanguard mercenaries this time but with the Sacred Seven's full deployment, 50 knights in white and gold armor, 3 battle mages floating 6 feet off the ground with staves crackling with holy energy, and at the front Guild Master Aurelius looking older than he had in the dungeon, like the void energy he'd been siphoning was starting to catch up with him. "Malakor," Aurelius called, voice echoing across the clearing. "Jax Mercer. You're both under arrest for treason, harboring a Class A threat, and conspiracy against the crown. Surrender now, and I'll ask the tribunal for mercy." And I looked at Malakor, who looked back at me, then said with bone-dry voice, "Mercy. From him. That's rich." "You have 2 choices," Aurelius continued as if standing in front of an 8-foot void demon who could end him with a sneeze. "Surrender the vessel. Surrender Malakor. And I'll make sure your sentences are manageable. Or refuse. And the Sacred Seven will end this right now." And I looked at the Sacred Seven, at Aurora studying me with piercing light-filled eyes, at Seraphina staring at the ground, at the other 5 centuries-old warriors who dedicated their lives to hunting someone they'd never bothered to understand. And then I did something impulsive, something that would change everything. I stepped forward toward Aurelius, toward the 50 armed knights, toward the entire kingdom's military might, and said loud enough for everyone to hear, one question. Before we surrender to a man who buried a cosmic weapon, framed an innocent kid, and spent 4 years drinking void energy like it was morning coffee, why don't we all just, not? Aurelius blinked and said, what? So I continued, why don't we stop and think about what's actually happening? You're a guild master with a secret. The Sacred Seven are the kingdom's heroes hunting a guy who doesn't want to fight anymore. And I'm the E-rank nobody who accidentally bonded with a void lord over a granola bar. This is a bad sitcom. Not a war, and the Sacred Seven laughed, all except Aurora, 3 of them actually chuckling while Aurelius did not laugh, his face turning a shade of red I can only describe as angry tomato. This is not a joke, Mercer. You are harboring, Aurelius began, but Malakor cut him off, stepping up beside me, not in front but beside like an equal, a free being. One the Sacred Seven has already declared not a threat. Unless of course the leader of the Sacred Seven would like to publicly contradict her own ruling, and Aurora's jaw tightened but she didn't contradict him. Aurelius, Aurora said, turning to face the guild master with ice in her voice, what is your interest in the vessel? And Aurelius's face did something complicated, jaw clenched, eyes darting, for half a second looking like a man cornered before recovering his composure with the smoothness of a career politician. The vessel is a Class A artifact. It requires specialist handling. I was merely siphoning power from it for 4 years, Malakor interrupted, and using that power to make yourself indispensable to the kingdom, to the Sacred Seven, to me. You didn't find the vessel to protect the kingdom. You found it to control it. To become it, and the silence that followed was heavier than the basement silence, public, the sun shining, 50 knights watching, every single one realizing their beloved guild master who'd built the Atlas Vanguard from nothing and led them through the breach wars for 3 decades was a liar. Aurelius's hand went to his sword, not the ceremonial golden one he wore at ceremonies but the black one, the void-forged one, the one he'd secretly forged from the vessel's stolen power, and he said with a voice pure silk over steel, guards. Arrest the Void Lord. And the E-rank mercenary. Kill anyone who interferes, and the guards moved slowly and reluctantly, the doubt and confusion clear on their faces because they'd followed Aurelius for years and now he was ordering them to attack the Void Lord in broad daylight in front of the Sacred Seven with 50 witnesses. Malakor didn't even flinch, he just sighed, a very dramatic very long sigh suggesting he was considering moving to another continent and starting fresh, and said to me, does this guy ever stop talking? Not when he's cornered, Malakor said, and when I replied, rough, the first knight suddenly charged before anyone could react, and then the fighting didn't last long, not because Malakor killed everyone, not even close, he just appeared, moved, and suddenly 50 armed knights were on the ground, not dead, not even seriously injured, just very asleep, knocked out with precise strikes to pressure points he'd learned about 4 centuries ago when human fighting styles were still interesting. Non-lethal, Malakor said, dusting off his hands in the aftermath of the silent takedown. I'm trying something new. Compassion. It's weird. Don't tell anyone, and I replied, you knocked out 50 knights in 3 seconds, so Malakor corrected me, 7 seconds. And 3 of them were just very dramatic falls, and I looked at Aurelius who was staring at his unconscious guards like they'd betrayed him personally, his void sword still in his hand, still glowing, still pulsing with stolen power. Last chance, Aurelius, I said. Put the sword down. Tell the kingdom what you did. The vessel. The siphon. The 4 years of lies. And maybe, the tribunal will go easy on you, but Aurelius laughed a cold hollow sound and said, you think I'm scared of you? Of this, gesturing at Malakor and the Sacred Seven and the vessel mark on my wrist, calling me just a kid with a fancy new pet, and then he charged without any further warning. I didn't even have time to call out to Malakor. Aurelius moved fast, faster than I would have thought possible for a man his age with that much void energy surging through his veins, his black blade slashing toward Malakor's chest and trailing void energy like black fire, but Malakor caught it with one hand like it was a twig, though this time something was different because the void energy in Aurelius's blade surged, flowing up Malakor's arm and into his shoulder, and Malakor's void forged armor began to crack, black fissures spreading across the obsidian-like spider webs. I saw it happen in slow motion, Malakor's eyes widening not in pain but in shock because something was wrong. The void energy wasn't attacking him, it was recognizing him, and then, draining him, siphoning his power just as he'd siphoned the vessel's energy for 4 years, so I yelled, Aurelius. Stop. You're using the vessel's power against him, and Malakor's voice came back tight and strained, he's using it against both of us. As his knees buckled and the black fissures in his armor spread further, Aurora stepped forward with her holy sword blazing and yelled, Aurelius. That's enough, but he snarled back, not nearly enough, and said his eyes were fully black now, void energy replacing the whites. I've been drinking from the vessel for 4 years. I don't need the sacred 7. I don't need this kingdom. I'm going to consume the vessel's power entirely. Rewrite the awakening system. And make myself the sole ruler of everything. And I could feel the vessel in the dungeon below calling to him through the soul resonance mark on my wrist. Aurelius, stop. I called. The vessel doesn't just give power. It takes everything. Your memories. Your soul. Your name. You're not becoming a god. You're becoming nothing, but Aurelius laughed, and then the void energy surged, a massive wave of pure black light exploding from his sword and washing over everything, Malakor, Aurora, the nights, the trees, the sky, and for 3 seconds the entire world was void, and when the light faded Aurelius was gone. Not dead, not exactly, but whatever he'd been, the guild master, the politician, the man who'd built the vanguard from nothing, the father who'd once bought his son honeycakes after training, was gone, and in its place was a creature of pure void, taller than Malakor, darker, its form constantly shifting like smoke, its eyes voids, absolute nothingness, and the creature looked at Malakor, then at me, then at the sacred 7, and opened its mouth. A voice came out that was wrong in every way, too many vocal cords, too many languages, too many screams and whispers and silences all at once, and the void version of Aurelius said, Thank you for the power. Before raising its hand, and the sky darkened, not clouds but pure absolute light-eating void spreading across the noon sky like ink in water. Within seconds half the capital was in shadow, people screamed, birds fell from the sky, the sacred light of the Royal Academy flickered and died. Malakor pushed me behind him and roared, Run, to the capital, find the vessel's anchor, the royal bloodline can channel the purification light, only they can stop this, but I yelled back, How? Over the rising wind as the void creature grew larger, its form becoming less human, more like a storm-given flesh, and Malakor turned to face it, his wings spread now with void energy pouring from them like dark fire, screaming, he became a vessel for the vessel's full power. If he consumes the vessel entirely he becomes a true void monarch and nothing in this world can stop him. The void version of Aurelius raised both hands and a beam of pure black light thick as a house shot toward the sky, the ground cracked and trees uprooted, the very air turned to void, so Malakor yelled, Jax. The capital. Now. I'll hold him. Go. I looked at the thing that used to be Guildmaster Aurelius, now bloated with void energy till it blotted out the sun and was expanding by the second, then at Malakor who was already walking toward certain death. Don't die, I said, my voice cracking, and Malakor looked back over his shoulder and smiled, saying, I'm the Void Reaper. I don't die. I nap. Big difference, then he charged, and I couldn't look back, couldn't bear to watch him face something that could unmake reality itself, so I ran through the forest and through the fields toward the capital, my legs burning, my ribs screaming, the soul resonance mark on my wrist pulsing like it was trying to tear through my skin. I reached the capital to find chaos. The void shadow had spread to the city's edge, people running in panic, the royal guard forming battle lines, the academy's mages casting light spells that fizzled against the void like water on oil, and the king's voice boomed from every corner through enchantment spells saying, Stay calm. The Sacred 7 will handle this, and I could see pinpricks of light at the city's edge where Aurora and the others were already fighting, holy fire and void countermagic clashing in the kind of battle that reshapes landscapes, and somewhere in the middle of it all was Malakor. I reached the royal palace in 20 minutes, the guards at the gate tried to stop me but one look at the void resonance mark on my wrist, the serpent rune pulsing with dark light, and they stepped aside for word travels fast when the sky is falling, so I burst through the grand doors, through the corridors, up the stairs to the highest chamber, the throne room of the sun where the royal family gathered in times of crisis, where King Aldrich and Queen Alara and Princess Isolde stood with the royal archmage Eloan who'd studied the Void Temple's history in secret for 30 years. The vessel has consumed Aurelius, Eloan said as I burst through the doors, and I wasn't surprised, she'd been waiting. The void shadow will reach the palace within the hour. We need to activate the purification light, so I asked, how, gasping for breath, and she said, the royal bloodline can channel it. But it requires a conduit. Someone bonded to the vessel. Someone with the vessel's mark, and she looked at my wrist at the serpent rune pulsing with dark golden light. The vessel chose you, Jax, Eloan said. And now? It needs you to choose it back, and I looked at my wrist at the mark that had appeared the moment I touched the vessel, at the hum I could feel in my bones, the same hum I'd felt at the bottom of the dungeon when Malakor's chains had broken and his freedom surged through the soul resonance bond, and said, I don't know how to channel purification light. I'm E-rank. My skill is talking to monsters, to which Eloan replied, your skill is listening. Understanding. Connecting. That's what purification is. Not destroying. Not burning. Understanding the void well enough to turn it into something else. Something whole. I closed my eyes and reached for the mark on my wrist, reached for the vessel's hum, reached for the bond I'd built with Malakor, the trust, the understanding, the shared silence of 4 centuries of loneliness meeting 4 years of being unwanted, and then I listened, not to the void or the void creature screaming outside, but to the vessel itself, to the hum, to the tiny bright star at its center that had appeared when I touched it, the star that was me. The mark on my wrist blazed, releasing golden light that was neither void nor holy but something entirely new, a light that made the air shimmer with possibility, and the vessel answered, from the dungeon below, from the heart of the void temple beneath the capital, a beam of light shot upward, golden and void and everything in between, piercing the dark cloud covering the city and painting the sky in colors no artist had ever imagined, and the void creature let out a shriek like 1,000 voices screaming in unison as the void shadow began to retreat before the purifying light. At the center of the golden beam stood Malakor, covered in void energy and golden light, half his armor cracked, wings spread wide, crimson eyes blazing, holding the void creature back with his bare hands, not killing it but holding it, and I could see his face was tired and pained but determined as he roared over the battlefield, Jax. The mark. Use it. So I pressed my marked hand against the palace's ancient void temple stone, the same stone the entire capital was built on, the vessel's physical anchor. And I spoke, not a spell, not a command, just words, the only words that mattered, I choose this. I choose the vessel. I choose the bond. I choose to see past fear. To understand before I judge. To build instead of destroy, and the golden light surged, from my wrist and from the vessel below and from everywhere and nowhere at once, washing over Malakor and over the void creature and over the entire city. The void creature shrieked and began to dissolve as the purifying light consumed it, and rising from its dissolving form, not as the corrupted guild master or the void monster it had become, but as the man it used to be before the vessel and the greed and the 4 years of stealing power, a younger Aurelius, maybe 30 years old, the vanguard leader who'd once believed in protecting people, and he looked at Malakor, at me, at the light consuming him and whispered, I forgot. I forgot why I joined the vanguard. Why I wanted to protect people. The vessel, it showed me everything. And I wanted it all. The light consumed him gently, not painful but peaceful, like falling asleep after a very long, very hard day, and when it faded Aurelius was gone, the void creature was gone, the vessel's dark shadow was gone, and in the sky where his void form had been was a snake, massive, golden, made of light and old magic and something that felt like forgiveness, uncoiling from its position in the clouds and spiraling down through the air to wrap around Malakor like a hug. The Ophiuchus symbol appeared for the first time in 4 centuries, the serpent constellation, the mark of the void temple's highest guardians, coiling around Malakor's shoulders like a living scarf made of golden light, and Malakor looked up at it with crimson eyes that glistened, not crying because void demons still couldn't do that but something ancient and tired and suddenly unexpectedly hopeful shining there, and Eloan whispered beside me, the void temple. The vessel. They recognize you, Jax Mercer. E-rank. The kid who talked to monsters. I looked at my wrist and the serpent rune had changed, still dark, still void, but now there was a faint golden outline around it, like the void had found its other half, and outside the sky cleared, the sun came out, people cheered and cried, the sacred 7 stood in a line looking up at the golden serpent in the sky with faces filled with something none of them had felt in centuries, hope. Malakor walked toward the palace toward me, the golden serpent still wrapped around him like a living scarf, his armor cracked and covered in battle dust but he was smiling, stopping in front of me and saying, hey. I owe you a granola bar, so I laughed and cried a little and then hugged him, and he was very stiff and very awkward but he didn't push me away, and he said into my shoulder barely audibly, "Thanks," and I said, "Anytime." "Anytime, big guy." That night we sat on the palace roof and Malakor had compressed his void energy so he only looked like a very large, very broad man instead of an 8-foot demon of destruction, and to anyone watching from below we were just two guys sitting on a roof eating pizza, pineapple pizza, which I'd ordered 3 of. Malakor had eaten 1.5 and was clearly considering the third, and after the pizza was gone and the sun had set over the capital I asked, if you'd stayed in that dungeon, if I hadn't shown up, what would have happened? Malakor was quiet for a long time while stars came out and the golden serpent constellation from the vessel remained visible in the sky, a constellation of new light where no star had been before, and he said finally, "I would have died. Not from the seal. From boredom. From giving up. 400 years is a long time to be forgotten. A long time to be feared and hated for something you didn't do. I was halfway there. Ready to let the seal finish me. Let the void take everything." He looked at me. His crimson eyes caught the starlight. "Then you fell. With half a granola bar. And the worst skill in history. And you talked to me. Like I was a person. And for the first time in 4 centuries. I didn't feel like a weapon. Or a villain. Or a monster. I felt like someone. Again." Malakor clapped me on the shoulder and I didn't say anything, just sat there watching the constellation. Then he said, "Hey. I heard the Sacred Seven offered you a position, and I confirmed I had. Earlier in a private meeting with Aurora and the full council, they told me the kingdom needed someone who could bridge the gap between humans and void beings, someone with soul resonance, someone who'd proven that fear was the real enemy, not power." "What did you say?" Malakor asked, and I looked out at the capital at the lights twinkling in the distance at the kingdom that had called me trash and thrown me away and tried to bury me in a dungeon and forget I existed, and said, "I told them I'd think about it." So Malakor snorted and said, "You're not joining the Sacred Seven," and I looked at him and at the golden serpent constellation coiling around his shoulders like a living scarf and said, "Depends." And when he asked, "On what?" I said, "On whether they let me rename the Void Temple snack bar. It's currently called the Abyssal Maw. I want to change it to the Void Snack Shack." Malakor laughed, a real genuine belly-shaking laugh that made the roof tiles rattle, and said, "Deal. But if you put pineapple on the pizza there, I'm burning it down." So I said, "Deal," and that was the end of episode 1, or more accurately the beginning of everything, because the kingdom was healing, but healing takes time and trust takes longer, and somewhere in the distance a new threat was stirring, something older than the void and darker than the vessel that had been waiting for the vessel to be freed so it could consume it. But that's a story for another episode, because for now we have a kingdom to rebuild and a temple to reopen and an unlimited supply of granola bars to share, because some people get therapy but we got each other, and honestly I think we're gonna be just fine.